everybody! It's Christina Jamerson, Miss J from RHS. Hope everybody's doing okay out there. I decided I wanted to start doing a regular video series just to stay connected with you all, to answer any questions you have, and since you don't really have the place in the classroom to ask them right now, I thought this would be a good way to do that. So before we get started with this week's theme, I have a few things I wanted to share with you. First off, if you're one of my students and you haven't been, please make sure you are checking your Google Classroom, keeping updated with assignments we're doing, any other activities we have going on, and if you have questions, you need to talk, find me there, okay? I'd love to hear from you. Hope you're all doing well, but make sure to reach out, especially if you need some extra support right now, which I think most of us do. Next thing, as many of you know, some of you may not, I built a website that I'm very excited about. So that is for a number of things. It's for the department, really. So shows that are coming up and info about those once we get them announced for the season. Things like classes that we're going to be offering, or just more info about your instructor if you were curious. All kinds of stuff can be found on the website there. So I will be sure to post that on here so you have access to it if you haven't found it yet. So please check it out. Also, any incoming freshmen, so our current 8th graders, if you were curious about the theater department, please go check out that website and please ask if you have any questions. I'd love to chat with you about it. We'd love to see you in the program next year. There's all kinds of classes we have that are stage theater related as well as performance arts, but not theater related. So check it out. Let me know if you have any questions. Another thing that a lot of you may know, but some of you maybe don't, is I got married recently, and it was right before we weren't coming back to school for the year, so I didn't get to talk to any of you in person, but that happened. I'm very excited. We're doing well, but that does also mean with that is going to come a name change, as I've decided. So for now, Jamerson is still on everything, but eventually I'll be shifting over to Maroney, going from one Irish-Scottish name to another, and so you will see that. If you notice, in fact, the Auntie M Studios, that was an idea that one of my students had, because many of you call me Miss J, and if you wanted a variation on a theme, we're toying with it, so it's there. Anyway, so just be aware that in emails and things that may end up changing, so if you're like, I don't know who Maroney is, that's me. So let's continue on. For this week, we're doing our Q&A about tech, all the backstage stuff that happens. And so I posted on my Facebook page to get questions from people, and so I've got a bunch of those, so I'm going to answer some of those for you now. So John asked about how to take tech skills, any sort of backstage skills, and actually turn them into real jobs, real professions. So there's a number of things you can look at for that. One is there's lots of actual theater jobs that exist and so many that are not on stage. So in a small place, such as Roseburg, there are definitely some of those available. Mostly you're dealing with backstage running crew, sound, lighting. We have a few paying gigs for that locally, but not a ton. When you get into bigger cities that have more professional theaters, then of course you're going to have more opportunities for jobs. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is in tech in particular, you are training to be good problem solvers. And being a good problem solver will apply to literally any job that you want. So that can be things like learning how to work with a deadline, learning how to work with people that maybe you don't really want to work with or are not your best friends, but still being productive in that safe, how to be safe in a work environment, as well as any sort of job that has, say, a design element to it. You have had experience with designing. So I would encourage you to not only look at what actual technical theater jobs are available, but also how can you take the skill sets you've learned in tech and translate those to a workplace, because that is resume material right there. So I would think those things over, but lots of opportunities. Another cool thing relating to that question is, many of you know, a couple years ago I went to Broadway for a teacher's workshop, and it was amazing, and I talk about it all the time. And it's in New York, so it's far away for me and expensive to get there. But this year, because of everything going on, they are going online, so I actually get to attend their workshop again this year from my house in Roseburg. And so one of the classes in particular is about all of the jobs, all of the things that go into being backstage in theater. So I will have more information about all the different types of jobs specifically when you're talking professional theater after I attend that. So I'd be happy to follow up with you there. So next question. Anthony wants to know about the knots for Treasure Island. So if you were involved or saw Treasure Island, it was a great pirate show. You'll hear about it several times through this Q&A. And so you may not know, this kind of feeds into another question that somebody had. A project that I personally worked on for set design for Treasure Island was doing all of the rigging. So in case you didn't realize, it was entirely climbable rigging. So all the way up to the gridiron, which is 52 feet in the air, that rope ran from up there all the way down to the floor where it was securely rigged and knotted, of course, appropriately. And then we had these cross pieces going up about 15 feet. Students didn't climb that high, but technically they could have with it holding their weight just fine. So I was really proud of that piece, but of course you have to have the right knots to do it. And I was really fortunate to get to connect with a real-life tall ship historical ship captain who works on the Lady Washington and Hawaiian Chieftain group. They're a tall ship group that sails around all over the West Coast, and they do educational tours as well as tours for fun. I've been on their ships before, and I actually got to take the group for Treasure Island on one of those educational tours on the tall ship, which was amazing, by the way. So it happened to be our captain on our cruise was the one who I was in touch with beforehand for doing the rigging, which was amazing. So that's where I learned what the best approach and knots would be. Specifically, one of the knots I used a lot is called a clove hitch. It's pretty standard for sailors. And so there's a really good website. I'm a very visual learner, and so it helps me a lot to get to see it step by step repeatedly and try it myself. So I used a website called animatedknots.com, and if you go there, you can click on any of these types of knots and it'll show you a one step at a time approach to how to make any sort of knot, which is really handy. So highly recommend checking that out. Isabel, hi Isabel, miss you, would like to know about costuming. And so how do I decide what sort of costumes we're going to use, what's appropriate for the time period? And so for that, it really depends on a few things given our situation. One is doing the research. If you're curious, that's my dog over here and the other dog. Hello, dogs. Helping me out. They're helpers. So one of the things is research in terms of what is the time period we're actually in for the show. And the next thing is, what are our resources available to us? So that could include, what do we have in our own prop room? It could include, what does UACT or UCC have that we can borrow? Because we've got this lovely partnership with our local theaters where we help each other out. We lend each other costumes and set pieces and things. So a lot of stuff will come from those places. If it's really a modern day thing, you can always hit up Goodwill or another secondhand store, which we've done before as well. Sometimes if it's really fantastical, like say Little Mermaid, you just have to make the costumes because you're not going to find anything on the shelf that's appropriate. So sometimes it's a matter of making or hiring somebody to make costumes as well. So first you do the research. Second, take stock of your resources and figure out what's going to be the best approach. And sometimes it's a mix of those things. Chris Davidson, hi Cupcake, wants to know, are there any shows that I have chosen specifically not to do because of technical issues? That's not my main concern when I'm choosing shows, but it is certainly something to consider because any show we do, I want to be able to do it justice. So a few shows that I wouldn't do in the rows, just generally speaking, would be ones that really require flight. Technically our system could handle it, but if you don't know, hiring a professional flight company is expensive, and some places have the budget to do that. We really don't, so that's not something that we do, and it's not safe to do it without professional help. So things like Peter Pan, for example, I'm sure it'd be a very fun show, but I feel like you wouldn't be able to do it justice if you can't really do the flying well. So that's something that I haven't done. Another show that would be amazing in theory, but of course has a lot of technical challenges, is Phantom of the Opera. It's so rarely available anyway, and you have to have basically professional opera singers to do it, so those are challenges at a high school level, just in terms of amount of trained voices for that sort of show. But technically speaking, there's that important bit about the chandelier, dropping from the ceiling. I think that would be a challenge. And there's also, getting down to the labyrinthine areas below the opera house, which Could be done in a number of ways, but really hard to compare to the original Broadway production, which is in its 30-something year at this point. It's been going a while, so that would be tough to compete with. Pierce wants to know, what are some of the technical difficulties with the simplest solutions? So this is one actually that Pierce helped me out with when we did Sound of Music. We had this really cool, essentially 8-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot cube on wheels, and it served as the centerpiece for our house. And so that was great, but it was a lot of weight, and it was people on top of it, so that's even more weight. So the wheels eventually needed to be replaced as the show started going, but this thing is so massive you can't just flip it on its side. There's no way. So it was actually my now husband, Xavier, hi Xavier, who had this great idea that we basically Jiffy Lubed it. So we took out a panel from the stage floor that is part of the trap room, which is kind of like the orchestra pit. If you haven't seen it, you can pull a panel out and then you can get underneath it. And so we pulled out a single panel. We wheeled the entire beast over the top of that panel, very, very wide on either side, so there was no chance of it, falling in or anybody getting hurt. And then I was underneath it, basically pulling the wheel out and then replacing it with a new one. So it was very Jiffy Lube style, and that solved the problem. So worked out great, just took a little bit of brainstorming, and then there was a solution. Millie wants to know, what's your favorite set design? So I would say to build, personally, was Treasure Island, just because basically the way our set designs work at RHS is it's myself and our tech team that come up with the ideas and execute the ideas together. It is entirely a group dynamic, which I love about that group, and so often the pieces that come together in a show, I mean, I'm part of it and I help guide those things, but they're not my set pieces, whereas with Treasure Island, the rigging in particular was sort of my baby project, so I feel really partial to that one personally. As far as ones that I've seen live, again, Phantom of the Opera. Part of the show is big spectacle, and they do big spectacle really well on Broadway, unsurprisingly, so I think that's probably my favorite example that I've seen in a show. Next question. My buddy Jason wants to know, have you ever spent money on a show on something specific and then you were disappointed in it, or vice versa? Have you ever done something DIY that you feel came out better than it could have if it was a purchased product? We do so much DIY in the Rose Theater, and I love it, and that's part of what makes our theater what it is, because we have this wonderful, clever, strong tech team to do those things. So we are fortunate in that way that, I get to teach them the basic skills of how to do these things, and then they get guidance as they need it, but they get to run with their ideas, which is fantastic. So some of the examples that come to mind, again, for Treasure Island, there were the vines. Electra, shout out to you. So many vines tying on to the pipe, single one vine at a time. So many vines, but it looked great. And we didn't need anything more than that to get that sense of, ooh, we're in the jungle. So that was really cool. A few years back, we did Once Upon a Mattress, and the mattress, Millie, the mattress, oh man, it was so good. She wanted to take that thing home. It wouldn't fit through the door though, so it wasn't going to happen. Sorry. And the birdcage as well that Ashley primarily worked on in that one were both really cool pieces where I don't think you could buy a prefabricated version and have it, well, buy one at all really, but also buy one and have it be better than what we could do. Plus, then there's the pride in your work that you get from that. So totally worth doing. Callista wants to know, hi! She wants to know biggest costume malfunctions that needed a quick fix. So fortunately we haven't had a lot of costume malfunctions, and we haven't had any major ones on stage, at least that I'm aware of. But we've had a few things that have happened. One of the cool things is in tech, but also just some of our actors in general either know or learn how to do basic sewing skills. So let's say somebody's button pops off, which has happened. There's at least one person backstage who can probably fix it while other things are going on. So that's a really handy skill to have. We have had to replace a costume fairly last minute, where we found this perfect dress for Liesel in Sound of Music, and then the zipper on the dress was broken because it was from the 50s and it just didn't stay. So that was unfortunate. We did have a show, I won't say who, but somebody had a petticoat that part of it was visible, and it was supposed to be, but they didn't realize their petticoat was inside out. And I doubt most other people noticed, but because I do the costuming most of the time, I was very conscious of that fact. But I think the only people who knew before this were me and them, and now all of you know, so you're in on the secret. Congratulations. We've got a question from Felix that is about the writing element. So we're talking backstage, but well before a production. So Felix's question is basically, what is some advice for writing good, solid stories, whether it's for plays or just, stories in general? There's all kinds of advice you can find on this, but I would say some very fundamental things for every writer would be the following. Make sure you have characters that your audience can care about. If they don't care about your characters, then they're not going to be invested in your story, so you can just stop right there. So make sure they have characters, that you have characters that your audience can care about. Make sure you write something that you know, or at least you can learn about, because especially if it's a really specific sort of thing and it's rooted in reality, if you don't know what you're talking about, it's very obvious. So if you want to write a story that takes place in the Australian outback, you should probably do some research to get to know a little more about that area. Or if you're writing about somebody who is an attorney and you want it to read as realistic, don't just watch a bunch of movies with lawyers doing things in a courtroom, because a lot of those are not exactly realistic. Ask my lawyer husband. But do your research. And so you know what kinds of things you should put in that is going to give it that ring of authenticity. The other thing I'd say is, remember from your English class, anybody who's ever taken an English class, there's that thing, right? And it does that. Basically, your exposition, your rising action, all of those things. Same deal in a story and in a play. You need to start with, give us some information, things get more exciting, and the climax happens, and then things start to resolve themselves in some way, and away we go. It's a very oversimplified version. I apologize to my English teacher friends if you're like, that's not the whole thing. But you at least get the idea. Reference that diagram, and because that can help, that would hopefully help with your storytelling as well. So Allie wants to know, hello, we miss you. She wants to know what moments come to mind that are redeeming, where I was making theater happen and just felt that overwhelming sense of pride and accomplishment. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the shows that I've done at RHS. Again, if we're talking the tech and backstage side, having a strong tech team is so important. It is so important because we're not a professional company who has a paid hired team who does that, and then a different person who does costuming and a different person who does directing. I am the theater department, and so I am in charge of all those things. And if I didn't have an awesome tech team, I don't know how I would manage. So it really is a whole group effort that brings everything together. So every time we put on a show successfully, we get to stand back and look at that and say, hey, look what we did. Look at these cool things everybody learned. And it's an awesome experience. Last question for this week. Jake wants to know, what are the biggest exploding rainbow watermelons I've seen or done in a show? Now, let me take a moment to explain. If you don't know what that is, an exploding rainbow watermelon is a phrase that goes back to the days of Brad Allen, where basically it's this big crazy idea, and it probably won't work in that version of itself on stage, but you could at least try. Like saying, for example, I want to flood the stage and have actual sharks swimming on, like, that's not going to work, right? But you can think about, how can I evoke that feeling? Or what are some really cool stage tricks we can do to make that feeling come across? So exploding rainbow watermelons, big idea, really hard to pull off, or if you can pull them off, it's just astonishing. So in that vein, I got to go see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, both parts, when I was in New York a couple years ago, and I don't want to give stuff away, but I will say that some of the stage magic and projection work that they did absolutely blew my mind. To the point where when I went back, because it's a 2-part deal, when I went in for part 2, I knew how they did some of the things, so I was watching for it, and I still couldn't see it happen. Like, the level of work they did with the projection and the stage magic is just, like, I don't even have words for it, obviously. It's just amazing. So I would say those things, everything in that show really, technically speaking, was incredible. That's all I have for you this week. I plan to put together another video for next week, and if you have any suggestions about what you'd like to see, what questions you'd like me to answer, what sort of theme you would like, please let me know. You can let me know in the comments, or you can go to my Facebook page. Many of you are on there. If you're not, you can track me down on there, Christina Jamerson-students, and feel free to ask me questions there as well. So I hope you all are doing well. Stay safe, stay connected with your friends. Zoom and other video conferencing things are a totally valid way to have a social date right now, so I highly recommend you do so. Watch parties are awesome. National Theatre in London, as well as some Broadway shows by Andrew Lloyd Webber, are going online for free for 48 hours in most cases, and that's a thing that's happening right now, so I would recommend checking out their YouTube channels. There's lots of good theatrical things you can get involved in virtually at the moment. I've got a whole page under my distance learning tab on my website. Check out my website. You can see all of the distance learning stuff on there. There's a bunch of links for just cool theater things to do as well. So until next time, see you then. Stay safe.